Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's ISE webinar. I'm very excited to be bringing you together today for what is becoming a very hot topic, ChatGPT, the use of AI, both on campus and also in recruitment processes. My name is Steve Ishwood, Joint Chief Executive of the ISE. I'm responsible for knowledge and insights. I'm going to introduce the rest of our participants today very, very shortly. But I'll give you, if you're new to an ISE webinar, just a bit of a rundown about the way these work. We've got a mixture of, we've got some data from Lisa, from Sybil, that we'll be going through first. Then we've got some questions that myself and the panelists have worked through to cover the key topics that we want to get through this session. We did ask you when you registered if you had any questions, and we had 98. Now, I have promised the panelists I'm not going to go through all 98 of them. There were some duplications, but I've picked out the most common and the most interesting ones. But we do encourage you to get involved in the webinar. We do like to make it interactive, so please use the Q&A function. Please also use the chat function. I'll keep an eye as we're going through that. We will finish on the dot at 12:30, but we have allowed about 10 minutes at the end for sort of free form questions. So hopefully we'll be able to get to some of those as well. All right, I'll stop with the waffle because there's a whole lot of ground we want to cover today. And as I said, this is a very hot topic at the moment. If I go around the screen, we'll do introductions first of all before I hand over to yourself, Lisa. But Michael, you're in the top left of my screen. Would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I work for JISC. We're the agency, not-for-profit that provides solutions to all the universities and colleges in the UK. And I'm co-lead of our National Centre for AI.
Great, thank you. Michael, Robert, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I'm Robert Newry, CEO and co-founder of Arctic Shores, a psychometric assessment provider, but entirely done through tasks. So we don't ask any questions, and we get measures of personality and cognition, and very interested in the world of AI and technology, and excited to be joining this panel.
Great, thank you, Robert. Jamie, would you like to go next?
Yes, hello. Jamie, founder of Neurosight. As an organization, we combine neuroscience and artificial intelligence to build assessments for employers that identify talent and potential with high accuracy and no bias in a few minutes. On a personal level, I'm a business psychologist with about 15 years commercial experience. The majority of that in emerging talent assessment and selection. I've either designed or had oversight of the design of the embedded solutions in about a third of the top 100 graduate employers. Through that, developed a really deep understanding of how those processes work. And for the purposes of our discussion today, the specific vulnerabilities in those processes vis-a-vis ChatGPT.
Fantastic. I'll get you to introduce yourself, Lisa, as you start your presentation. But just before you do, I just really wanted to make the comment that when ChatGPT first came on the scene, what is that, 3, 4, 5 months ago, losing track of time this year, there was a lot of noise initially in the university space, and actually lots of universities said, God, what are employers doing about this? And I said, well, at the moment, actually, most I ask haven't even heard of it. And we seem to have gone from that situation to a situation where it's on front of everybody's mind in a very, very short period of time. So I don't think we can underemphasize how rapid that pace of change has been. But really pleased that we got Lisa with us today, because Lisa's been asking students, because of course it's students who will be using these tools who are making the application. So, and we thought it'd be great to have some insights into that mindset. So Lisa, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then if you take the stage first of all and talk us through the data that you got for us?
Yeah, no problem. It's great to be here. Great to be asked to speak. So yeah, as everyone said, my name is Lisa, and I'm the head of research at Sybil. So for those that you don't know, Sybil are a market research consultancy based in the UK and Ireland. Essentially, what we do is we specialise in students, early career students, so school leavers, but also university students, about their kind of aspirations, thoughts about careers, but also what it's like to go to university, what it's like to be at school, kind of any kind of well-being issues that come with that, but also how they kind of change their thoughts and feelings and the tools that they use for careers. So hence the chat GPT survey that we did. Before I go into the chat GPT survey, just to kind of explain what we do a bit further, is that we run 3 core studies every year. So we have a career-specific survey for school leavers, another career-specific survey based on the kind of university students and graduates, but also the mental health research. So that's what we do every single year. Those are tracking studies. But we also do more bespoke research, and one of the research we've done most recently is a snap survey on ChatGPT. So essentially, we just went to our student database. We have our own panel of students. We call them the siblings. And we asked them, okay, well, what are your thoughts on GPT? Are you aware of it? Have you heard of it? And do you use it? And I think what's one of the kind of initial really interesting things that came out of this survey was essentially who filled it in. So we didn't do any weighting on this. We just did a completely natural fallout of survey respondents. And actually what we found when we compare this to the kind of total sample of students out there, slightly, ever so slightly more of the respondents were males compared to the HESE data of who goes to university. And that means, you know, slightly proportionally fewer were female. And that is, I think, quite interesting because normally market research wide, it is the women that fill in surveys overwhelmingly. And so for this time that it isn't, it's actually kind of the men that are filling it in. I think just shows sort of maybe who's it's on the radar of. It's more on the kind of male side of things than females. Also, when we kind of compared the stats with subject-specific stuff, it was really the STEM students that were filling it out more than the non-STEM students. So again, you know, maybe the kind of essentially the maths, the physics, the chemistries, the biologies, the life sciences, the engineering, those kind of students, they're kind of more on the ChatGPT radar than the more the kind of humanities students. And then when it came to ethnicity, it was more likely Asian and Black students, so there's ethnic minorities, than kind of white students and their other ethnicities that were kind of filling in the survey again. So that was who is on their radar, kind of who is filling in this survey. We also kind of saw this when we were thinking about, okay, well, one of the first questions that we asked was essentially, well, are you aware of ChatGPT? And we did this as a screener question. The people who said that they weren't aware of it got screened out of the survey, and that was about 1 in 10 students. So actually, the overwhelming majority of students have heard of it on some level. Doesn't mean they're using it, but you know, are aware of ChatGPT. But when we break this down into specific groups, it's overwhelmingly the Asian students, so kind of almost all of them, 98% of them, said that they were aware of ChatGPT. Final year students, proportionally more than the middle and first years, were also more likely to have heard of it, again with those STEM students as well, more likely than the non-STEM students to have heard of ChatGPT. Just because you've heard of something though, doesn't necessarily mean that you're using it. And who was using it is actually more likely the kind of the Black students and the final year students that were say proportionally more than average anyway. Average is in that kind of dotted black line that's saying that they were using ChatGPT. And I think it's actually interesting that the kind of final years is so much higher than the first and middle year students, because you'll see kind of later we're like when we ask them why they're using this, is actually like more to do with the kind of job applications than to do with studies. And that's actually what I've got on the next slide. When we ask specifically, well, how are you using it? Are you using it for your studies? About 7 in 10 students said that they would use or are already using for kind of research-based things. I thought kind of initially when you look at this slide, I thought it was quite interesting that actually around about half of students are using it already. So about for research, you know, for their research, for the assignments, that's already quite a relatively high proportion. And then about 20%, 25% are saying that they would consider. So, you know, again, the majority of students are very open to using ChatGPT when it comes to kind of essentially studying. I think what's also interesting is the number that said that, you know, no, I would not use it for exams. About, you know, over a third of students said, okay, you know, I won't even consider it for exams, and to a lesser extent are those students that are thinking that they would use it for exams as well. And when we get down to the comments behind that, the reasonings behind it, a lot of students were saying, you know, it's really good. It gives me, you know, an initial starting point. It gives me kind of a background on a subject, helps me start. It gives me a starting place where they can go on and do some more research. But actually, we have people being like, for my really advanced economics degree, it's wrong most of the time. For my mathematical degree, it's also wrong most of the time. And actually, it takes away from some of that creativity and that initiative that I've gone to university for. You know, I've gone to university to learn how to learn, and using ChatGPT doesn't help with that. So on one hand, yes, I do use it you know, it's really good for my, you know, kind of that initial point, but I'm not going to rely on it. You know, that's not why I'm there to use it. When we asked us specifically about job applications, though, a lot of the comments were a lot more positive around this. Essentially, they were saying, oh, it's a really good place for, you know, hints and tips around cover letters, you know, interviews, etc. You know, this isn't anything particularly advanced. You know, it's not like my degree where you need really, really specialised knowledge, and maybe there isn't a wide pool of that on the internet. Whereas, you know, there is quite a wide pool of knowledge around kind of hints and tips of how to, you know, essentially go through the application process. So again, quite high rates of not only would they use, but you know, have already used. I would say though probably a slightly lower rate of have used completely than we saw for the studied. But again, how much of that is because, you know, we had quite an even split of year groups, and I think it's only really the final years that probably have going through this really strict recruitment process, and therefore probably would have used it anyway. When we ask students, okay, you know, you are using it, you may be not using it for whatever reason, but do you ultimately think it's a positive innovation? Do you think it's going to improve the world for better? And just over half of students said yes, they do. And actually, I think that, you know, it's kind of reflective of the people who go to university, in that quite a lot of them are the younger generation. They're, you know, from Gen Z, and typically with any kind of things that new in the world, it is the younger generations that pick them up more. They're less kind of nostalgic about things. They're more open to change, more likely to adopt change. So I think that is quite typical of students today. There was one comment who sort of likened it to, well, you know, just because you could, you know, travel to France in a horse and car doesn't mean I should do it for nostalgia reasons when the train is just so much more convenient. You know, and I think that just summarised it. You know, if something is truly really convenient, that quite quickly outweighs quite a lot of the, you know, nostalgia and anything else that comes with it. Having said that, when we did ask students, do you think it should be regulated? Again, similar kind of rate said yes, like I do think it should be regulated. And I think that comes back to those comments saying that a lot of students found that it was inaccurate when they were doing it for their degree. And, you know, you can only really improve that with a bit more regulation. There's one very Terminator-esque comment there. You know, if we do not regulate it, it will regulate us. If you do not have control over it, like, it will one day dominate us. So a bit doom and gloom. But that was one comment that I thought I should highlight as a bit funny. But essentially, most students thought it should be regulated, but purely because of its inaccuracies when it came to that subject-specific stuff. Here's essentially all the main points from the SNAP survey we did, just to quickly summarise. Essentially, it was the Black and final year students who were most likely to have used ChatGPT. About 7 in 10 students said they would be really open to using it for studying. Maybe kind of a lower rate for exams, those and that, again, because of the inaccuracies. But 7 in 10 students kind of would use it for a job application, so they're a bit more kind of open to it, that kind of recruitment experience. And then about 1 in 2 think it is a positive innovation, and kind of similar rates that should actually be regulated. That's a quick presentation from me. I think we're going to open it up to a bit more of a discussion now.
Yeah, Lisa, that's great. Thank you very much. So just sort of, sorry, Lisa, I should have warned you I was going to ask you this question, but it came to mind as you were going through the data. I know that at Civil you've done sort of mental health research and various other pieces. Do you have a view on whether students are, I wanted to say truthful, but that sounds a little bit unfair. I was wondering if they maybe underestimate, when you say, for example, something like, will you use this in exams? Will you use on an application forms? Do people sometimes say, no, I wouldn't, but actually when push comes to shove, they go, you know, well, everybody else is, so sod it, I'm going to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We do find our surveys, people are quite brutally honest because they are completely anonymous. And so with that cloak of anonymity, you do get some very honest answers. I think there is probably still a difference of, you know, maybe not outright lying in a survey, but, you know, wishful thinking. Like, no, I won't use it, you know, in an exam. Like, I won't do that. And then, you know, when it comes to it, maybe they do. But I do think from having read the comments, although people weren't specifically saying I won't use it in exam, there was very much a sentiment that they weren't 100% sure it was going to be correct or accurate enough to then, pass that exam. A lot of comments were around, oh, I did my assignment for real, and then I ran it through ChatGPT, and I felt like I would have failed or got a lower mark using the ChatGPT because I just feel like it wasn't like of high enough standard. But I think a lot of that also is to do with university degrees being quite advanced in some cases, and then ChatGPT just hasn't caught up to that. Whereas maybe more simpler assignments or kind of subjects out there which already are covered quite widely anyway, and ChatGPT can handle it. Maybe then there is a slight difference. And I think also, as all of these things, as they get better, the more people use them, they become more developed and more advanced, then maybe that issue will be kind of negated, and then there'll be more kind of expectation, well, not expectation, but more sort of desire to then kind of use them in exams and things like that. So it's a long-winded way to answer your question. Sorry.
Oh, that's right. That's great. Robert's pinged a message to us as panelists that I know the rest of you tuning won't be able to see, but I thought it's worth raising at this point, actually. You talked about ChatGPT generically, didn't you? Not 3 or 4, but 4 was out. Is that right, when the survey was done?
So the survey was done sort of mid-May. So I'm pretty sure 4 was out then, but we didn't ask specifically. We just did more of a general thing. We didn't want to confuse things. We just did more general.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think we might get into a little bit more of those differences a little bit later in the conversation. That's great. Lisa, you are going to, am I right? That's going to go on the Civil website at some point. So because there's quite a few questions about the data and some of the breakdowns, people might have missed it. So we are recording it, so people will get the recording. But I think you're also going to have the data available, aren't you?
Yeah, it will be on civil.com. So if you go on civil.com, it will be there along with kind of a take-home article that will summarise the data. So yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll put some reminders out at the end. I just wanted to double check that. Great, Lisa, that was great. Thank you very much. Right, okay. So for those of you that might have joined just slightly late, I've been keeping an eye on the chat just to let you know, we're going to go into a panel conversation now, which we've got a few areas that we want to cover that we prepared in advance. We asked pre-registrants to put questions through, so I've got quite a few of those that we'll go through as well. But also, I can see the chat's getting very lively. Pop anything to the Q&A. We've got time at the end, so if we can get to it, I will do my best to do that. So, right. So, Michael, at the earlier on, I talked about actually, when it on my radar, this appeared in the university space first, and it feels like that's where the earliest debate started happening, particularly around coursework, all that kind of stuff. So do you want to just give us a quick sort of summary of what that's been like and how the sector has reacted over the last few months?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does go back a little bit before that. So generative AI has actually been with us for a couple of years now. And we started the discussion really in earnest last summer, because that was the point that it was starting to get to the point, even though ChatGPT hadn't been released, other tools were using it and were getting pretty good at having assignments. And I think we did our first webinar focusing on assessment in November. It was very much on people's radar at that point. And the initial discussion was all about assessment. I think that's fair to say. And initial reactions were about banning, but things moved on quite quickly. But it's not all been about assessment at all. So, and that really reflects the kind of thing that we've seen the students are saying that they're actually doing. So it's about how can you use it in your studies? How can staff use it to help them do things like prepare lesson plans and things like that? So it's not just about students. And how the world of work is going to change. So the way that the curriculum's designed, students use it needs to reflect that. So it's kind of early discussions about that as well. I can go into a bit more detail on kind of what's happened on the discussion about assessment, because that's probably the thing of most interest today.
Yeah, that'll be great. It's because it's obviously we ask questions about exams. It's funny, my daughter's right in the middle of her GCSEs at the moment. In fact, she was doing GCSE physics this morning. I've yet to hear whether it went well or not, but I'll get a message soon, no doubt. But it made me think that, she was telling me about, the rules, how it's all done at a very school level. It's so controlled, which of course is totally different to the university space. So, how are universities dealing with that whole sort of regulation of assessment?
Yeah, so I guess people went on a bit of a journey on this again. So they started off with, okay, let's just try and avoid AI. And actually exams still are largely done in exam halls and are, AI proof a lot of the time, but they're not terribly authentic. They're not really what we want to do for assessment. And what we don't want to do is move more back to an exam hall type thing. So the next kind of discussion moved on to what appeared to be an attractive, let's outrun AI. There are things it can't do. And I think that come across a little bit in the data we heard about the students. But that really, that's not a viable strategy because it's improving all the time. Heard about its inaccuracies and things like economics. Thing is, in the paid one now, there's a plugin that goes into the Wolfram Alpha service, which is something that's brilliant at maths. It can now do all sorts of complicated and higher things in all sorts of STEM areas if you're willing to pay the £20 or $20 a month that it couldn't do. People talked about, let's create assignments that have got diagrams in because ChatGPT can't read diagrams. This was in January. In, I think, February or March, OpenAI announced that, yeah, it will be able to read diagrams. So I think there's an understanding that that's not attractive. So we've got to move on and embrace it. Think about how assessments can be designed to make use of AI, how we can give students guidance on the appropriate ways of using it. And also, not mentioned today, but think about what the role is around AI detection. And that's kind of quite a complicated one. Most universities have access to tools that can detect AI. They have problems in that they can give false positives and they're not 100% accurate. But also, we actually want students to use AI. Yeah, that's going to be in the workplace. We want to use it in the right way. So just detecting AI is not terribly helpful. So the initial kind of thing that people were doing were just understanding how AI affected their particular assignments. Yeah, and that's so you can have a good conversation with the students because the assignments are already set. You can't change those. But if you as a lecturer run it through, attempt it, you can have a sensible conversation with your students. All universities have put out guidance to students basically to say you mustn't submit work that is generated by AI and pass it off as your own work, which is quite easy to understand, and have discussions with students about, you mustn't do this. Yes, there are discussions about it getting things wrong and things like that, but also affecting your learning. But that's kind of very short term. We in JISC are convening a working group to help. First of all, there are obviously lots and lots of different assignment types, 50, 60 different categories of assignments in reality, and they've all got different issues. But we also want people to start thinking forward about what would be a better way of assessing people. And this is something sectors wanted to do for a long time anyway. So perhaps essays have been overused, same one over and over again. We all know they want to change. This is acting as a catalyst to think about, okay, how can we create something that's authentic, makes use of AI in a constructive way, but is something that students want to do. And that's kind of where the discussion is at the moment.
That's great. Yeah. I get the sense that it has moved on from the kind of, if you use this, we will put you in the stocks and throw tomatoes at you too. Actually, we've got to embrace this. This is the world, and it's how do we adapt and might it force some good changes? As you said, stuff that sometimes you just have to change it, and the technology changes.
Yeah.
Cool, great. Thanks, Michael. That's a really good background. I think that paints a very good picture in terms of that's the experience that of students actually within their education setting, which of course, as they start to think about work, they're going to transfer and use that knowledge in the work environment now. So let's go on to a little bit around actually, so what is happening in terms of that assessment landscape for employers? Because of course, like everything else, the world has changed significantly over the 20 years I've been in the sector from when, I hate to say this because it shows how old I am, numerical verbal reasoning tests were done with pen and paper, and you drag people in the office to make them do it. So, but I won't bore you all with that kind of history lesson. But as we said at the start, this is very, very quickly come onto the radar for employers. So let's explore that a little bit more. So the first question I've got for Jamie and Robert, which is around technology. why, it is so integral to so many recruiters' assessment methods now, that ability to front load actually a lot of these innovative tools that we see now that we just weren't, be able to do before that technology was available. So why don't we start sort of big picture and try and unpick a little bit what are the implications of ChatGPT when it comes to these tools that employers are using in selection. Jamie, do you want to go first on this one, and then I'll hand over to Robert?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So to answer this question, we really need to consider not where ChatGPT is right now, but where it's going to be in a few months' time. Because from an emerging talent assessment perspective, the first ChatGPT native cohort is at university using ChatGPT. They're about to graduate. And when the hiring cycle opens September, October time, that's when the issue will come to the fore. And to understand the implications of ChatGPT on assessment processes, we need to think like this. So right now, the developer build of ChatGPT-4 has been trained on a data set 571 times larger than the free version of ChatGPT, GPT-3. And it excels at advanced reasoning and problem solving. And it is terrifyingly capable. So to give you a few examples, it scores 99th percentile in verbal reasoning tests. It scores 90th percentile and rising in numerical reasoning tests. It can ace situational judgment tests and assessments like that. It can pass pretty much any assessment you can throw at it. Now, when I talk to some employers, I had this conversation with a few employers, and they've said, well, it's okay, we'll just make it so they can't copy and paste, and we'll think of a way of doing that. Right, so at the moment, when you use ChatGPT, it's true, you need to type out responses or copy and paste into ChatGPT, but that is soon coming to an end. So the developer build of ChatGPT has these plugins which you can discreetly use in a browser, and GPT-4 has vision, it can see. So what does that mean? It means for candidates, students taking these online assessments, they can use a discrete browser plugin that can see what they're doing and give them real-time guidance as they complete the assessment, or they complete a video interview, or they complete a virtual assessment center. That is the reality that we all need to face up to in a few months' time at most, right? So in answering that question, what are the implications? It's through that lens that we really need to judge the true implications of ChatGPT on emerging talent assessment processes. And it goes without saying that a tool that is that capable and that easy to use is going to be widely used. We've already seen the data from Lisa indicating that ChatGPT in its current limited form is in widespread use. Well, just imagine when that's publicly available. I mean, you'd be crazy not to use it if you're applying for a job. So that is a roundabout way of answering that question about the implications. But all employers, evaluate your process in this way. Think GPT-4, vision that can see websites, discrete browser plugins, and an AI that's capable enough to pass any assessment you can throw at it, pretty much. And that's the reality that we all need to be facing up to.
Thanks, Jamie. There's quite a few people going, eek, wow, as I'm looking at the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not really the bearer of good news here, but I hope as we continue to talk about this through the discussion, there are mitigation measures that you can put in place and changes that you can make to confront this challenge. So it's not all going to be doom and gloom, I promise you.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely get to that.
Yeah.
And Robert, what are your thoughts? I know that you've blogged about this. You've been thinking about this an awful lot as well. How do you see things from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, there are two important things here, which is what we want to measure and how we want to measure. So there is, as Jamie articulated, a threat here that the traditional way that we measure things can be easily manipulated. But there's also a bigger question here of what do we want to measure from people? In the past, it was why we had numerical reasoning, verbal reasoning. It was because we wanted people to be able to analyze that information and then produce an answer from it. Actually, we've got generative AI that will do that better than a human. So things that we want to measure going forward would be more like creativity, empathy. There will be much more the human skills that we need to bring out. So I think that's one thing around this. And I think the other thing then is how we measure it. And that's what Jamie alluded to a bit and Michael alluded to as well. and we'll have to rethink these ways that we understand people and whether they're a good fit. And I think the challenge that's going to be for employers around this is being able to see the wood from the trees in terms of what is smoke and mirrors in terms of a silver bullet to addressing these things, and what is actually something that's going to be a genuine solution. And one of the challenges that we see around this is these terms, ethical AI. And I've seen a few people talk about that as if that is the sort of golden phrase as a way of getting around this. But actually, what does ethical AI mean? What we really want is safe AI, and that means that how is a human being involved? Is it transparent in the way that AI is being used? So are we able to explain it and audit it? And then how is the human being involved in the final output and checking it before it's then used in anger? So I think there are threats here, but there is a process around which actually AI can be used, and particularly generative AI, and there may be as well other ways. And I think that's going to be really important, that we think about how we understand if somebody's going to be a good fit for a role in the future. And the future of work is very different and is going to be very different from where we are now. And part of the thinking has to be about what are the skills that we want going forward, as much as what are the methods of which we're going to measure that.
And your organisation, Robert's, been groundbreaking, some of the technology you brought to assessment. I mean, even just the language of numerical and verbal reasoning feels so ancient compared to the plethora of tools that are out there now. And does ChatGPT actually impact different types of tests differently? I mean, is it something that we really got to think about? It's not just we can't just talk about AI generically, and we definitely can't talk about tests generically. Any thoughts on that?
It does, and absolutely, we're going to have to rethink it. If you think how many, and I'm sure many people are on this call, the traditional approach to understanding if somebody is suitable for a role will involve an application form. Anything that's text generated now can be improved and enhanced through something like ChatGPT-4. One of the things I worry about that is a social mobility challenge around that too. As a few people alluded to here, ChatGPT-4 is behind a paywall, so that's going to give people with a higher socioeconomic status an advantage, and that's desperately everybody is trying to reduce that disadvantage that people on a lower socioeconomic status background have. So I think that's one really important thing to think about here too. And then I think the things around timing as well. So we're going to have all sorts of discussions around proctoring on all of this. Is everybody who does any kind of application suddenly going to be asked to use video on all of this? And we're going to go backwards in terms then on the way that somebody looks and approaches, through a video interview, is a way that they get selected or not. So there's some really important questions around this, and I do think, and that's why I alluded as being my final point in my article for the ISE on this, that business psychologists, I think, turning to subject matter experts who really understand about how you can rethink the process in a way that doesn't introduce bias, but also addresses this big problem we're going to have, is how are you going to differentiate people when tools are going to make every application look perfect, or even worse, some applications, because they've got an economic advantage, look outstanding when in fact the person is not.
And I would echo that point on expertise. I mean, it's a slight divergence, but I remember many years ago I inherited a graduate recruitment function where all the assessment process had been built using people from the business who'd created case studies, etc. Absolute nightmare. Had nothing to do actually with testing what people needed to do the job. But that's a slight tangent. Jamie, anything you'd add to what Robert said there in terms of ChatGPT, different types of tests impacting in different ways?
Yeah, Robert made some great points there. And just to build on that, if we think of the embedded assessment solutions in emerging talent employers today and their specific vulnerabilities to ChatGPT, we can generally group the assessments into two loose buckets, right? Technical and behavioral. Dealing with technical first, because it's easiest to deal with, Michael made a great point earlier about leaning into ChatGPT and potentially allowing people to use it. Now, engaging with employers, what I've noticed is a cultural divide is opening up. There are some employers who are embracing ChatGPT, and for them, if they're using technical type assessments, which are less common in emerging talent, but they're still often used in engineering tech type roles, then you can lightly rework your technical assessments to lean into ChatGPT because it reflects how candidates will apply AI tools in the workplace, and that's fine, that's an easy fix. If, however, you're one of those organizations, and I speak to a lot of law firms, accountancy firms who've banned ChatGPT, and they absolutely do not want candidates to use ChatGPT in their technical type assessments, that creates a significant challenge because you then have to in some way supervise those assessments. And if you can avoid proctoring, you should, for reasons that I'll explain later. There's all data around the negatives of proctoring. But then critically, we get to the realm of behavioral assessments. And this is sometimes termed strengths-based assessment, competency-based assessment, values-based assessment. It all means roughly the same thing. It's the measure of the behavioral traits that drive success in an organization. Things like learning agility, resilience, collaboration. And there is no world in which you want candidates to be able to use AI tools to convincingly portray a version of themselves that is false. Because if they do and you hire them, you could make a nightmare hire, right? Because those behavioral traits are the difference between an amazing employee and a terrible employee, right? And so on the behavioral assessment side, to appreciate the vulnerabilities of embedded behavioral assessments in emerging talent employers, it's necessary for us to understand how they work and why that opens them up to vulnerability to ChatGPT, because in doing that, we understand how we can resolve the issue. Right? So if you look at the embedded behavioral assessment solutions in the vast majority of emerging talent employers today, they use what we call scenario-based assessments. So sometimes these are called situational judgment-based assessments, sometimes situational strengths, sometimes they're called job simulations. They're all the same. They present scenarios often with immersive content, and they present candidates with a limited set of options, which they pick or rank order. Right? And these will be aligned to measure the kind of traits that drive success for that organization, like resilience, like learning agility. Now, it's long been understood in the world of business psychology that these type of assessments have certain limitations, certain downsides. And one of these downsides feeds specifically into their vulnerability to ChatGPT, and it's this. They usually have a low accuracy aligned to the things that they're supposed to measure. In the world of assessment, we call it construct validity, construct being the things it's supposed to measure and validity meaning accuracy. And you typically see a low construct validity or accuracy aligned to things like resilience, collaboration, etc. with these assessments for this reason. Candidates with high levels of verbal reasoning and problem solving approach these assessments as a problem to solve, right? They want the job. So they read the scenarios, they read the response options, they evaluate them using problem solving and verbal reasoning skills, and they pick out the right answers, not based on who they really are, but what they believe the right answers to be. And that leads with these assessments that the strongest correlations you see in these assessments are not the things they're designed to measure, by the way. The strongest correlations are with verbal reasoning and problem solving. And now, why is that a problem in relation? I mean, that's bad enough on its own, right? They're not really working as they should, these assessments. But in relation to ChatGPT, why is that an issue? Because GPT-4 excels at many things, but there are two things in particular it really excels at. verbal reasoning, and problem solving. Right? So, you know, you can clearly see then that for these scenario-based assessments, which, by the way, the vast majority of emerging talent employers use today, the ability of GPT-4 to be discreetly plugged into a browser and to guide candidates through these assessments is going to nullify them in short order. And that's a big challenge, a big problem for the vast majority of embedded assessment solutions in use in employers today. Now, we mentioned proctoring. I don't know if we want to get into that yet, but I've got some data. Do you want me to share that now, or should we save it for a bit later? But some employers, I've already seen some assessment providers say, oh, proctoring, that's the solution. But the challenge with proctoring is that in order to partially resolve this, what would we have to do? We'd need to record the candidate's screen, number one. We need a camera recording them, otherwise they'll just use a phone or another device. And that's highly invasive, right? So that kind of invigilating or proctoring, there's lots of data demonstrating why emerging talent employers would not want to move to that. So to give you an example of some of the data, we know that heightened anxiety reduces performance in assessments, right? 71% of neurodiverse candidates experience heightened anxiety in a proctored assessment. 66% of female candidates, 39% of candidates indicate they would refuse to take a proctored assessment. That rises to 70% of disabled candidates. So for employers who care about gender diversity, neurodiversity, accessibility, candidate experience, proctoring is not a viable or attractive solution. And I would also suggest, if I may be so bold, that there is a question mark here around, are these scenario-based assessments, which we know are very lengthy, up to 90 minutes, they drive high dropout rates, they're not very accurate, they adversely impact often BME candidates and candidates from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they're not neurodiverse friendly, and they're very expensive. Is that a status quo that's really worth saving with invasive proctoring? And that's the challenge I would, put to the general assessment industry and to employers as well. So it's, I've never known a time like this. I've worked in assessment and selection for 15 years. I've never known a time of greater uncertainty. But although I think there will be short-term disruption, I think it would be reasonable for us to say, but look at the status quo right now. It's not like we're living through some kind of golden age of candidate assessment where everything's wonderful, right? Far from it. The embedded solutions in use by many employers have the significant downsides we've mentioned, and perhaps ChatGPT, in forcing us to move away from those kind of assessments, could end up being a very good thing. So there is a slight positive spin on the tail you can add to the end there, but there's no denying in the short term it will be highly disruptive.
Like Michael was saying, yeah, it drives change to, It's interesting that word proctoring, words come into the lexion rapidly, and proctoring is one of those words I'd never heard of, or if I had, it was not in my mindset. I say everybody talking about proctoring. Robert, can I just come back to you on just to follow on for what Jamie's saying? And it is, what are the options available to employers? I've got the chat open on my screen, and my initial thought was, well, actually, back to face-to-face interviews. Again, and I've moaned about this in the past, actually, not having interviews. We used to train, you had 2 days interviewer training that you used to have to pass. That's, and there's been some great advantage of putting testing up front. It means that actually, our ISE data shows there's much less reliance on things like academic criteria as benchmarks for candidates, because testing has been able to, be done remotely, be done online up front. So what are your thoughts on employers, Robert? If you're an employer, what are the options that are available to them when it comes to actually dealing with these kind of situations? Because again, the time saving that we've made by doing stuff through technology, actually, when you're an employer and you're doing face-to-face interviews or trying to do testing actually in a building, we've made great efficiency savings for both the candidate and the employer over the years. Sorry, that was slightly rambling. I'll go back to my main point, Robert. Yes. What's if you're an employer now, what do you think the options are available to them?
Well, I mean, I'm absolutely in agreement with James that this is an exciting time for innovation and a chance for us to really rethink the whole process, back to my earlier point of what we want to measure and how we want to measure it. So clearly anything that is text-based is not going to be something that's effective in distinguishing who you should bring forward to interview. I mean, we're always going to have this challenge in the early careers. You know, we work with the likes of, you know, PwC, Arcadis are getting sort of tens of thousands of applications. How on earth do you then shrink that down in a fair way that isn't text-based to those that you want to bring forward to interview? Because you clearly can't interview tens of thousands of people face to face. So I think it's going to be thinking about how you start using tasks now. How do you start using interactive elements to it? I mean, you know, the ability now for us to use different media to understand about people has changed dramatically. So I think there'll be a move much more to audio, to a combination of video, to a combination of tasks. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, and clearly this is where Jamie and I agree on this, is going to how do you pick out things like resilience? How do you pick out somebody's curiosity in a way that doesn't involve tasks, because it doesn't involve text, because clearly, you know, that's not going to be a great way to do it. So I think the thing for me is that there are ways to do that now. There are multimedia ways to do it, and it's a great opportunity for organizations to think about it. And the key bit about doing all of this is, what are you measuring it? How can you then get somebody as quickly as possible from that initial, this is what my true potential and capabilities are, to a face-to-face, and doing it in a way that doesn't introduce further bias. And it's perfectly possible to do that. Obviously, you know, Arctic Shores has a means of doing it, but there are other means through video interview as well. And it's really understanding how you can get those measures and doing it in a way that's as objective as possible.
Can I just pass on a question in the chat to you, Robert? Because Jamie very rightly was talking about the impact, of course, of this on diverse candidates. And I was talking to another colleague in the sector who was saying to me that, you know, you look at a solution and there's some chat going on around sort of proctoring one-to-one and invasive, and of course it will impact different students from different backgrounds differently. One of the questions in there that I hadn't thought about was actually that tools like ChatGPT are being created in the West. So does that mean that they are going to have Western cultural biases built into them? And is that something we should be thinking about? Would you agree with that, Robert, or have we not got to thinking at that kind of stage yet?
Potentially. I mean, you know, Jamie alluded to the ChatGPT-4 is using, you know, information several hundred times larger than previous versions, which is collected from the internet globally on that. So it's a large pool of data, but we don't know how it is selectively calling upon that large pool of data. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done around the way that you use prompts, because you can, like all these things, it's about how you configure and you use the information, or you access the tool that then will give you the output. And if you've introduced bias in the way that you've asked a question, then it's going to use its refining of that data that it's got access to based on the bias that you've introduced from your input. And this is why I think we're going to need some regulation. We're going to need some standards on this. And I think what the EU is bringing out is going to be very important around this. And you know, one of the bits of advice for everybody here is really understand the regulation around this as well, because you're right, it's a big database in there. There's lots of different ways you can access that, and you're as in danger of narrowing the output that you get from the way that you ask the questions as you are from the output being biased just because of the pool it's fishing from.
Got it. Thanks.
Well, just chipping quickly on
yes, please do, Mike. I was just about to come to you, actually.
If you want to see the cultural bias, just ask it to name the 10 greatest writers in history or the 10 best musicians, and you'll see, and then scale that across the rest of the input. Very easy to see.
Yeah, very interesting, very good way of testing. I hadn't thought of that. And Michael, we've got quite technical into, I guess, the more recruitment end of the piece, and that's where all the chat's been around. I wonder if you've got any reflections on, actually, is the same level of, I guess, technical debate happening within the university space? It might also be worth, I've seen people saying, actually, what is proctoring? Because I've seen a couple of comments in the channel, still what that word means.
Yeah, so proctoring is essentially remote invigilating. It's the American word for invigilating, really, the student in the exam. So it's spying on them while they're spying. That's a loaded word. That's how people typically perceive it.
You know what you mean. Don't worry.
I think the parallel is the discussion that's happening is, let's just work out a better way of achieving the end result anyway. So it's accepting that things, as I was saying, that the essays are perhaps overused and they aren't the best methods. So it's quite similar to the discussion you're having here, perhaps not because there's less technology behind a lot of the assessments. It's a prompt and go and do some work rather than go into a system. There's not the level of detailed discussion, but the overall kind of narrative is very similar, I think.
Great, thanks, Michael. And Lisa, just coming back to yourself before I sort of go into some of the questions that come through on the chat and on the Q&A, and also that we had in advance. Listening to all that, I guess, from the employer perspective and all the research that you do with students, I mean, the stuff that you did is very, very much hot off the press, was only carried out, over the last sort of couple of weeks or so. How quickly do you think this use of ChatGPT is going to escalate beyond actually the numbers we've already talked about? I mean, you haven't got a crystal ball, but do you think you'll be getting 100% if we ask those questions again in 6 months' time?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's quite hard to predict the future in anything, but I do think it's going to grow and grow. I think, like with all of these things, it's, I guess, good to compare what else is going on out there, and what we find in our school leaver study is kind of the rate of use of TikTok has tripled in the last 3 or 4 years. And the reason why I bring up TikTok is because a lot of comments we get around that is, well, I use it to find out, I don't Google things, I TikTok things. If I want to find out hints and tips around my CV, I currently TikTok it. And that is essentially the use of what they were saying in the survey of ChatGPT. If I want to find out hints and tips about, a CV or an interview, I will now ChatGPT it. And so it's like, well, that the use of that is the same. Yes, ChatGPT doesn't have an algorithm that means that you're going to get addicted to it, but that we know of. But I think I can see that trajectory as just more, as it gets more useful, and more students will use it. And if you think about the other basically the main barriers of what's preventing students from using it now is essentially the fact that it's not accurate, or they don't deem it accurate in their degree. But that is going to improve the more it gets developed, and also the regulation. But the regulation will again come in time. Everything eventually gets regulated nowadays anyway. So I think those barriers are going to be removed. And the only final barrier that is going to be left is essentially the access to it. Is there going to be a paywall? Does that mean only certain people are going to have access to it, or others? And that, I think, is probably in the long run going to be the main barrier for using it. The interest will be there. People will want to use it. But whether or not they can is what I see the future holds with ChatGPT.
So I've just seen a question pop in from Toby. I hadn't thought of this before either. So will ChatGPT 4 be able to listen into virtual interviews and then offer suggested answers? Jamie, you're smiling. Go on.
It already can. There's already been a plugin developed that does exactly this. If you go to the ChatGPT Reddit, it was up there a couple of days ago at the top as one of the top posts. It provides a live, it listens to the questions on a video interview and gives you a live script to read out. You can feed in your LinkedIn profile beforehand, so the script it gives you to read is tailored to you, and that happens in real time. Yeah.
Wow. God. This is beyond my life. I'm going to need to go back onto the websites, because I use old ChatGPT 3 and just thought, oh, this is quite interesting. It's doing things like writing songs. But wow.
We've been talking about online assessments a lot, but actually ChatGPT has implications for video interviews and virtual assessment centers as well. So yeah, interesting time.
Right. Robert, can I ask you a question? Again, looking at the chat, quite a few colleagues who joined us today are obviously from universities, from career services. What would you say to a student if you're in front of them? I don't want to preempt your answer. So yeah, what kind of advice do you think we should be giving students? Use the technology, get used to it, but be careful with it. I don't know. What would your thoughts be?
100%. Same advice as I gave, my team at Arctic Shores. Go and experiment with it. I mean, one of the things that I found fast, and share it with others. We did a sort of in-house sort of innovation day and got different departments to go and share back how they had used ChatGPT, and I think you could do that within your own student cohort too. And it was fascinating to see the whole way that people use the prompt experience. And one of the things, and I think particularly if you're probably a bit more on the sort of STEM background, you will think about sort of the reflective loop. And this is the thing about ChatGPT, is that it trains itself, and you can support its training on there to make really important refinements. And I think you've got to get to use it and feel comfortable with it. I mean, it as a sort of little light note here, I got ChatGPT to go and write my Mother's Day card this year, and I got the best response from my mother ever on it. But it took a little bit of prompting, and how do you think my mother might react to it? One final tip on this, which came out from one of the Arctic Shores team, is that the nicer the language that you used with ChatGPT, the nicer the response. So there is just some learnings on this, and it's changing very quickly. But a bit like throwing yourself into TikTok or whatever, you need to be using it all the time to properly understand it.
And Robert, you've this correlates again to another the questions that we had in advance actually, and I know you made some comments with us recently. We talked about students using AI and how do employers deal with that, but actually about flipping it the other way around. How might employers use tools like ChatGPT? Is that something we should be thinking about as well?
Oh, definitely. And I think for me, there are two things for employers on this. The one is what you should be doing with ChatGPT, and then the second is what you shouldn't be doing with ChatGPT. So what you should be doing is harmless things, like thinking about, if I was going to rewrite, and you could go through ChatGPT to do this, my career website that made it more attractive to a different type of persona that I've not normally attracted. You could get ChatGPT trained, and it wouldn't take very long to do that, to help rewrite some of your content on your career website. So I think that would be great. What you shouldn't do is to use ChatGPT to either help you make a decision or to create a tool that might make you for a decision. So screening CVs or screening applications forms a big no for me, exactly the point that Michael said, because you're going to get output there that's biased. You may not even realize it. Equally, interview questions, you're doing it without any training, without knowing what the results might come back and how that might introduce bias. So those are my two tips. Use it for something harmless, and definitely don't use it for things that might involve in a decision.
Great, thanks, Robert. Jamie, just coming back to you for one final quick question, because I'm conscious we are pretty much at the end of time. We were talking about this a while ago, and this is a topic for a whole other webinar. But you were talking about some work actually in your organization where you'd use ChatGPT instead of employing somebody.
Yeah,
because I think that gets us into the territory of how will the world change. I wondered if you just to close us off can tell us a little bit about that, because that is very much how the future might affect all of us.
Yeah, I mean, we lean into AI tools heavily, not just ChatGPT in how we operate at Neurosite. And there are a number of hires I was planning to make this year that we subsequently haven't made, because we've developed quite detailed advanced prompts in ChatGPT to produce work for us at a really high and complex level. The notion that ChatGPT isn't destroying jobs is demonstrably false. It's already destroying jobs, and that is a topic that causes me some anxiety when I think about it. I mean, on one level, it's great for us as an organization to save us a lot of money. On the other hand, particularly when I think about emerging talent hiring in the future, where is that going to go, and how this is where a question comes in around, does this kind of AI need to be regulated and taxed? Because it's going to, you know, it will soon displace an awful lot of jobs, unfortunately. And we need to think about, as a society, how do we respond to that?
And how much those jobs change, right? Yes, that's a subject for a whole other webinar, but I thought it'd be quite an interesting way to finish off. We are at the hour, and I know many of you will be going to grab some lunch, and I can see the numbers dropping, so people are going to lunch and next calls. That was a really fascinating debate. Thank you very much, everybody, for putting so much time and thought into it. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat, and it's one of the most lively chats I've seen in quite a long time as well. So we will most definitely be coming back to this subject, I think, many times over the coming months. Michael, your insights into HE, really, really useful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Robert and Jamie, both your organisations, very much involved in this. And I also do reiterate that point. Organisations, if you're not using occupational psychologist expertise, then I'm not just saying that's a sales pitch, but we need to be having that expertise in to make fair and ethical and effective assessment processes. And Lisa, student insights, really great. Thank you very much. I do wonder if we ask the survey again in 6 months, it will be everybody will have heard of it and everybody will be using it. So as I said earlier on, we have recorded this. Once the editing and the uploading has been done, we will put it onto the ISE website where you'll be able to follow it up. I know Lisa put some links in where her data is on the CIBIL website. Robert's got a blog on the ISE site. There's plenty of stuff out there, and we will be producing much more content. We're running out of spaces at our conference, so I'd like to say come to the conference and find out a lot more, because Jamie's doing a keynote and we've got other sessions talking about it. So we will be going back to this subject there as well. So if you are coming to join us in Manchester, I look forward to seeing you up there in a couple of weeks. So that's it for now. Like I said, we'll be coming back to this very quickly, I am sure. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody, and thank you once again to our panelists. Really very, very insightful. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.